Welcome, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights. Thanks, sponsors, Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentication, ComC.com, Burbank Sports Cards, Mike Stadium Sports Cards, Heritage Auctions, Huggett to Scott Auctions, Topps, Upper Deck, and Panini. Second part of the interview of me by Mike Payne that I recorded, and he will be turning it into a magazine article in the 40th anniversary issue out next month. So thanks, Mike, and here it is.
One of the questions I had was about baseball covers. I just wonder if there were any that you thought, I really like that. That's one of my favorites.
Try not to do those things, Mike. Basically, it's your favorite, whatever. I will say this. The first few years, I was the final say on covers. I took it really seriously, trying to figure out what subject. I'd rather have a bad photo of a timely player than a great photo of a guy that wasn't going to drive any demand for the magazines. Maybe 5 years. After that, I thought, you know what? By then, we had fabulous photography with the best photographers in the country, relationships. So we had access, and I just delegated it. I'm the kind of guy that if I stayed too close to it, I'd be sharpshooting. So I stepped away and said, you know what? I'm really going to like almost all of them. I might head scratch on a couple, and I'm not going to vocalize that. So to go back now and say, this was my favorite during this regime. My favorite probably, Mike, is the one that's not very attractive. It's volume 1, number 1. It's the Roberto Clemente and Dale Murphy on that first light baby blue cover. Those were my cards.
Looking at right now. Those were your cards, weren't they?
Those were my cards. Yeah. In fact, all of them were my cards. That's in the card library at Plymouth. That was my cover design. I worked with a designer, but I realized when I worked with a designer I didn't know, who was not top-notch and who listened to me too explicitly. I said, I want to show a couple cards. I want to get a little bit of a baseball bat thing going. I want to evoke the sport and the cards. And it was a she, and she took me literally. Certainly, our first few issues did not win any design awards. Later, through Dave Hadler, who'd been a magazine professor at UNT, became a close friend and was just really savvy. And he said, hey, let me play with this. And he's the one that designed, because he's multi-talented and really understood magazines. So you want this to look like a magazine? Let's start with a thicker cover, which I think really was smart because it gave a little bit of a card feel to it and more permanence, collectability. So he was, again, another blessing in the history of the company early on. About issue number 7 was the first one that had like a true magazine cover.
Yeah. The back of the issue, I got issue 1 up here. Wasn't it a Brad Newton?
My photographer of choice, I'd known Brad before that. Brad's a great guy, great friend, still.
Absolutely.
He was photographer for the Rangers, had a lot of, obviously, American League stuff. And I went to spring training. 2 of the photos at some point were my photos from spring training over the several times I went to spring training. And my artist of choice was Jerry Hirsch, who early on became a good friend. And we hired Mike and I knew Etta. I knew pretty much the whole family. I'm not highly relational compared to Pepper for sure, or my sister, but I believe in the power of relationships. And I probably am pretty selective. But boy, if I was selecting, I selected well. There were some great relationships. And Jerry and Brad, they just consistently came through for us. And we broadened the number of artists and photographers we used. But that became another one of the trademarks of inside covers and the outside covers and reversible covers and things like that. I wanted to have a fun place to work. I wanted to be fun for me and fun for you.
It was. And all you need to do is listen to people in that era talk about it, and they appreciate everyone's efforts. What ended up with all those returned first issues? You just trash them?
That would be heresy. That would be the opposite of what a collector would do. No, the first issue didn't sell out. I printed aspirationally and did not sell out. Okay, so we had some that were in the cases and we stored them not in a storage closet because at that point we had a skinny office, just not a big office, I think 1,200 square feet. In the back, there was a hallway to nowhere. And so we used that as storage with no door on it. I stacked them up neatly up against the wall in the corner. Unfortunately, there was a roof leak or a wall leak. So something happened. There was some compromise so that all of a sudden, a bunch of them were water damaged. Now, I did throw out the water damaged ones. Now I think they'd be saleable, but most of them got water damaged. So then it became a short print, what had been out there. So that was unfortunate, but I'm not stupid. I know that volume 1, number 1 of any publication generally has value, but it only has value if it's scarce. And so I was protected from an oversupply by this. Now people talk about statute of limitations, but I could have a massive lawsuit now against the landlord for not protecting with a bad roof. The damages now at $100 a copy times 1,000 copies that got damaged, let's say, that's $100,000. Show me the money. Now, nobody's going to fall for that. But if I had all 1,000 of them that got damaged, there'd be an oversupply. So all's well that ends well. It's a hard to get thing, and it's probably added to the mystique of the brand. It was such a popular, when you got 1 million people at that point, when you and Fred and Pepper were celebrating with your cigars, every one of them would have liked to have had an original Volume 1, number 1.
The reprint at the 20th anniversary.
And you don't even see those very much anymore.
No, I have one. And I also have the scarcest Beckett baseball cover ever. It is Josh Beckett shortly after the World Series. He posed for us holding a magazine, which we took the cover and put on there. He loved it. Our newsstand people at the time were not real enthused about Josh Beckett, even though he was the number 1 pitcher in the game at the time. They wanted Barry Bonds. I tried to explain, look, this is what we did and why we did it. And the player cooperated, and I'd like to go this way. I lost. We ended up taking that Beckett cover. It's called Beckett on Beckett, and using it geographically. And I want to say, Jim, less than 200 copies made it towards South Florida.
Yeah, I hear you. That reminds me, it was Harvey and Steve. Yeah, our newsstand.
Yes.
They were formidable. And at some point, they had quite a lot of power, certainly over the newsstand, because they were the gurus, supposedly. And they were good. But there's this blend of mass appeal and collector appeal. And I'm with you. But like I said, we created the Beckett on Beckett Scarce Collect. I've got a complete set of all the different variations that were bound up for me. So I'm pretty sure that's in there.
That's great.
That's cool. But yeah. If you put a bounty on it, I think you'd have trouble filling the bounty.
I haven't seen any online, and I've been looking for months. It's just not out there.
Those first nationals we went to as a company, we sold so many back issues. We paid our expenses in back issues.
I remember that.
And Wayne Grove, my good friend and former partner, and your buddy too, same thing. He'd have his own table, and he'd have issues that we didn't have because he had some hoarding DNA. Let's just say that. Wayne had some hoarding DNA. So he was doing great business with that. Paying your way to the national with back issues of the Beckett baseball magazine. I really took that as a compliment to our whole team. At those early issues, the prices were no longer valid. The articles had some value in the covers, but for people to try to get a complete set of the magazine, that was honoring to our whole team.
Yeah, it really was. Your days as a dealer behind the table, you had told me back in the 70s, you traveled and did shows before the National. I just wonder what that experience from the other side of the table helped with creating a consumer good for those people.
Number one, first of all, just to correct, I had a table, but I was not behind the table if I could help it. I was out circulating around because I always thought in the early 70s, mid 70s at a card show, I had zero base budgeting. Every dollar I made selling cards, I plowed into buying a collection or buying stuff from other dealers. So I wasn't making money. I was improving my inventory each show and improving my knowledge. I'm circulating around and seeing what else is out there. I was always a type card collector to some degree, but also complete sets. I've always looked at it as a learning experience, Mike. When I was doing those shows, that was fun. The hobby was simpler, was smaller, great guys. There were some couples there, but it was mostly dudes that just loved baseball. It was mostly baseball in those days. So yeah, I didn't like being behind the table. I didn't like making change. I liked paying for things, not receiving money. And so if I got money, I was going to spend it. And I usually come back with a little more money than I left with, but that really wasn't the aim. But it helped me to see of doing shows all over the country of what was truly scarce. It also gave me credibility and visibility when I sent out my solicitation for doing a monthly price guide. They said, we know this guy, the annual books. He can do this. It was a safe bet. They trusted me. And I've always wanted to be a trustworthy person. And part of that is being visible. Robert Levin, who was the owner of the Star Company, had the opposite. He was not visible. And so the distribution of the Star Company sets did not catch on. That company did not grow, and it finally went away. And hence, what's out there is scarce and valuable. And I don't begrudge that. But my goal was not to create a scarce price guide. It was to create a price guide that was going to be helpful and priced in a way that anybody could afford it. We always said, if you walk into a card shop and you've got $5, the fact that sometimes the first thing they purchased was one of our magazines for $2.50 or $2.95, and then had a couple bucks for cards, of which you could buy a few packs in those days. That, again, that was a compliment, because otherwise they're saying, what do I need a price guide this month? No, that was frequently their first purchase, but it didn't tap them out. I think we could have charged $10 for the price guide in those early days, and a bunch of people would have bought it, but that wouldn't have been right. So we reluctantly raised the price as our production cost, the cost of paper and ink and the color photography, the color treatments, but still always wanted to make it affordable and make it so it wasn't just for the rich kids. Everybody could afford it and could be a level playing field.
Talking about back Wayne and first base, and what's happened with Gervis?
Gervis moved out when his lovely wife, Stephanie, passed away. I want to say 10 years ago, but it was a while back. They'd been married for 50 years, childhood sweethearts. Really pretty crushing. He moved out of their longtime home, so he's moved back to where he grew up. He's a well-rounded guy. He sold his collection several times. It's just bittersweet. I'll invite him to stuff. He's responded in a nice way, but he's moved on. It makes me sad, because I couldn't have had a better partner in the store. And with Gervis first and then Wayne, great guys, passionate about the hobby, hard workers, completely committed, honest. What a blessing. I had to step away, and then they broke into two parts, but we remained friends for sure.
I really like Gervis.
Oh, he was awesome.
I haven't spoken to him in 15 years. Lost track of him, didn't know where he was. But I'm glad he's still around. Sorry to hear about his wife, though.
She had the Lewy body dementia, which is so insidious. It's so horrible. But she hung in there, and she'd have some good days, but mostly bad days. And finally, she succumbed to it. But I met Gervis in the 60s, the first guy I met in the hobby. So what a blessing to have a quality guy. I called him Mr. Ford, because he probably was 26 and I was 19. He didn't call me Mr. Beckett or Dr. Beckett. Of course, that didn't exist at that point, but we really tracked for many decades, and what a great ride we had. Some of the first software for maybe the second iteration of price guide software was his. And then he taught me how to update it. So then I did that, and then I did a new iteration, and that worked until Mark and the guys modernized our database.
Quite the team, wasn't it?
It was an awesome team. Again, we're talking about guys, some of whom have deceased or moved on, and we can still remember the sweet memories. Just to clarify, I did books out of my house, but I never did the magazines out of my house. That summer, I thought, you know what, I need to get an office, because this is going to be a lot of midnight oil. I'm going to need additional storage. So I was projecting ahead, but erroneously, I subleased a high-rise office from my attorney, who had an extra office that he gave me for very cheap. But taking magazines that first month up and down the elevator, a pallet of magazines didn't make any sense, and it didn't make me any friends in the building management either. So then I moved to the other place, and that happened to be, it backed up to where my sister Claire was working.
Really?
That wasn't even a decision point.
Wow.
But I had an office, and she was working in the high-rise next door, and she'd come over after her shift and help out. And finally, I hired her away from a good situation, and the rest is history on that. Okay, last question. You asked me, is the hobby tapped out, or is there innovation?
Yes.
And I was thinking a lot of the elements are in place, but I guess my statement is going to be, I think there's going to be further integration. And the beauty of this is that Fanatics, which is going to be the prime mover on this for cards going forward, even though I hope Panini has an important role in Upper Deck, but Fanatics is going to be the prime mover with the sole full licensee of the major sports. Eventually, there's going to be greater integration of cards with apparel, which they're already doing, with experiences, which they're already doing somewhat, with virtual aspects, which all of them will do. And the last one is one that I'm not happy about, but it's going to happen, gambling. Okay? There's going to be integration in the packs of those things. You're going to get a chance for some virtual, some real life experiences, some gambling stuff. I don't even know how that's going to work, but I think that's going to happen. Or apparel, which might not be game used, and it might not even be player worn, might be replica.
You're seeing it now with the Fanatics tie-in with lids, where you buy this $75 box and you get 3 caps.
Yeah.
At random, it's like a pack opening experience, and then you get a pack of cards too. So it's already underway.
But they can pull that off, and how they tweak those things. Like I said, my fear is that the gambling is going to be a bigger part of it than I would like. because I think that brings in a different element, further pushes the hobby toward that direction, which I'm old fashioned. I really want to collect for the sake of collecting. Absolutely, cards have been a great investment, but going forward, there's no guarantee they're going to be. They weren't intended to be a great investment 50 years ago, but they have been. Again, I'm not the czar. I'm not in charge. I do want to share my story and my opinions and let people get it. It's free. It's not, hey, you got to pay even $250 a month. It's free.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of other podcasts out there that are great. And I listen to a whole bunch of really good ones that are entertaining. I don't think I'm as entertaining. I'm certainly not as high production value as many of them, but I'm unique in that I'm me. And I get to tell my story to my friends and new friends and people that are curious or interested.